गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गना शॉट। गना शॉट में आप सबका स्वागत है। प्रणाम, वणकम, सत श्री अकाल एंड जय हिंद। आज हम बात करने वाले हैं एक बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट विषय के ऊपर, वो है सिविल मिलिट्री रिलेशंस। एंड these civil military relations are not normal civil military relations, but these apply to national strategy of a growing nation and how we have to behave geopolitically on the international stage. Right. इस context में, I would like to welcome General Prakash Menon to discuss this whole thing. Sir, good evening and welcome to Gunner Shot once again.
Thank you, Shankar.
Sir, and I just want to tell everyone that General Prakash Menon was the Commandant NDC when I was doing the course there. He's my guru. The second thing is he was in the Secretariat of the National Security Advisor, and he was at the apex body there. And thereafter, later, he was also part of the nuclear think tanks. He's written a book on nuclear issues between India and Pakistan. And to me, he's always represented someone who is a high order thinker. और इसीलिए आज मैंने इनको ये जो संगीन टॉपिक और हेवी टॉपिक है ये, और वेरी फोकस टॉपिक ऑफ सिविल मिलिट्री रिलेशंस in an international framework as for a growing nation like India or a rising nation like India, and as we expand our strategic footprint and we get more involved in global affairs, I thought I must call him over. So, welcome. Before I start the subject proper, you're opening a few words and then I'll take on the issues.
Thank you, Shankar, for the generosity of your words. And I'm indeed, my ego is boosted, but let me also confess that all of us are limited in terms of knowledge. I consider myself to be a teacher these days. And you learn on a daily basis because there is so much to know and so much that we don't know. Firstly, we don't know how much we don't know. And therefore, I look forward to this topic because one of the things was my exposure right at the highest level possible when I was the military advisor in the National Security Council Secretariat. And thereafter, I spent 5 years there. And I think that sort of opened my eyes to the higher level of civil military interaction and the importance of that to India's military effectiveness. So I think I really look forward to discussing that issue.
Right, sir. सबसे पहले मैं बताना चाहता हूँ, there's a Clausewitzian formula which says war is politics by other means. Everyone talks of war is politics by other means, but there's a converse to it. Politics is war by other means, and today geopolitics is war by other means. When you talk of contestation, geopolitical contestation, it is virtually politics as war by other means. And very strikingly, बहुत लोगों को इसके बारे में पता नहीं, Mao had said war is politics with bloodshed and politics is war without bloodshed. Both thinking, one with blood and one without blood. But having said this, and this I think governs the fundamental precepts by which nations behave with each other and politics interacts with the military, and both of them interact with the war or conflict kind of situations. So, isko maddenazar rakhte hue, sir, I will talk about the Indian framework. And first and foremost, as far as war, politics, civil military relations, अगर आप बता सकते हैं हमें कि हमारा संविधान में what is the framework in which we have to operate, what is laid down, what is the mandates given to the civilian hierarchy, and what is the mandate given to the military hierarchy for interaction to guard the territorial integrity of and sovereignty of the nation, and as also enhance its sovereign interests. Your views, sir.
Yeah. So I think it's necessary to sort of uh, identify the structural position that the Indian military holds within the Constitution of India. Because what makes it different from all other arms of the executive is the fact that it is only the military which has the president as its commander in chief. Now, the question really is, what does it really mean? In the At the time of the constitution, passing of the constitution in 1949, uh, it meant that the president, who had certain powers, which means that it could, in certain conditions, act without the advice of the union ministers or the advice of the state government, would therefore, the visualization was that in case of an emergency, the president could assume all the powers and the military would have to listen to its commander in chief in case of breakdown of everything else. This was the concept. But what happened was, but by the 42nd Amendment in Indira Gandhi's time, and the article, it was 52. There were two amendments. One was to do with defections of the political party. This power of the president was taken away. The president today can only act on whatever the advice of the central government is. It cannot go against it, and therefore, although it has the powers to declare emergency, but it has to go along with the thing. So the president was defanged from the original this thing of of what the constitution makers did. But what has remained is the armed forces still has the president as the commander in chief. So
Commander in chief.
it is now, and as the situation is today, it is more of a figurehead, because with this amendment, what has happened is that the prime minister of the country, if he has a lot of support in the parliament, could possibly assume dictatorial powers. I mean, this is what the original constitution makers wanted to avoid. But with Indira Gandhi's amendment, this is what the state of affairs is. So, in name, we can say that we have the commander in chief, but it is meaning nothing at all. But one thing which I think we need to notice, that since we have always professed being an apolitical institution, the idea that we are not loyal to the government in power or the party in power as much as we are to the head of state, who is above all these political platforms. So I think this structural uh, uh, thing as it exists today is something which we need to realize, because the conception is that there is a difference between the military institution and the politicians, or it's a different institution within the executive, which has to deal with one major problems of all democracies. And at the heart of that problem is that the military should obey the political orders, executive orders, whenever it is given, and cannot be allowed to act on its own, because that what was worrying and what has been seen all over the world is about military taking power and usurping the powers of the government. So at the heart of this issue of civilian control is this part. The other part is that the military is all in any nation, is that the political leadership has to see the military as an instrument which the politician can use, but being the nature of the instrument is such that it has to rely on the expertise of the military leaders in applying that. That expertise is part of the professional edifice of of the military institution. We can't expect that the political leaders would have any idea of this, and therefore It is in civil military relations what the important part, and you're talking about why it is why about India's rise. One of the things is for the military leadership to lay down the objectives which the military is expected based on the threats which it visualizes and what is to be achieved. Because these political objectives then thereafter has to be translated in a particular context into how much of military force is to be used and how it is to be used. And that is a military decision. But yet, it can always be circumscribed by red lines which the politicians draw, like it was done during the Kargil War, Vajpayee telling the Air Force not to cross the line. So, this is the art of generalship is about the politicians telling what you are prepared to do and how to do it. It has to be translated, and there is no in this translation every situation, every context, there is no standard currency for this translation. That is the art of generalship. That is what generals are expected to do, to translate the given political objectives in a particular situation, uh, and to see how force can be used to achieve those objectives. But broadly speaking, there are two areas which we need to see about civil military. One is, therefore, preparing the military institutions, sharpening that instrument, giving them the resources to tell them to do what they have already been told that they might have to do. This is one part. The other one is, while there is an ongoing crisis, then there has to be deepened military, civil military interaction to deal with that crisis, because the military cannot operate on its own. There are many other instruments which have to be put together, and therefore, all this requires a deepened state of military, civil military interaction during crisis. Otherwise, it is institutionalized. It is expected that the politicians will explain what the military has to do. Our problem is, and that's where the issue is whether there is clarity for the military. What does the the political leadership expect of the military? It's like saying that the defense minister makes a statement about we'll take POK, and of course there are statements from other people also. But the question really is, if you want to take POK, what all do you require? Do we have it? And how can it be done? Is that a priority at all in the larger imagination? Or is this just political rhetoric during election? So the question really is, the political leadership therefore has to understand political objectives, and therefore he has to understand the politics behind it. He has to remain apolitical, but without understanding political, because he is the instrument of the politician. Politician just to decide when to use it, against whom to use it. That decision is
Right,
theirs. We have to now decide how do we do it, and that's the crux
right,
of the whole.
right, sir. आपने जो बताया, there's a requirement. I mean, what it comes out is हमारा जो structure है, the armed forces notionally or functionally or in hierarchically are under the president and not under the prime minister. So there's a little bit of a dissonance. And secondly, uh, the art of generalship is to know what is expected out of them by from the political hierarchy, and it is also incumbent on the political hierarchy to get the best out of the generals or the military instrument in a given situation. And that given situation could be over a longer term to build up for national interests and national objectives to achieve them, or to respond to a crisis kind of a situation, like it happened in Kargil, or for that matter, in Eastern Ladakh or Doklam. So, given this, there is undeniably a huge requirement for politico-military fusion or deepened civil-military relations at that level. I'm not talking of normal district level. I'm talking of at the national level. So when I was talking about this, one of my audience came forth with a thing. When I spoke, I said, look, we're going to speak about civil military fusion, civil military relations. The question which he posed to me, and I think this is the fundamental question, from this question we'll go to the other questions. He says, what exactly is meant by civil military fusion, or rather politico military fusion, or civil military relations? The question he asked is military involvement in politics, or is it political involvement in military affairs of the nation? ये क्यों पूछा? Because he felt that if the military becomes more political, then the apolitical nature of our military and the clear objectivity of the military to focus on the external, and major issues of the internal get diluted, and we could get involved in day-to-day politics, which he felt was not correct. So I would like your views on this.
The term of civil military fusion is not applicable in
Yeah,
the
we'll
way that
leave that out.
we are now sort of talking about the larger this thing.
Larger civil military relations.
It came out from China.
Yeah.
China was the first country which used this terminology, however translated from Chinese, which actually was about something which was already ongoing, and it came out from the fact that this was to do with the preparation of the armed forces, especially in terms of the defense industrial base and R&D, where in the previous eras it was always from the military which things went to the civil. Now, for a long period of time, it is from the civil that it is coming to the military. There are a lot of things which are there in the civil which can be embedded into military systems, and therefore this term therefore was used in terms of your equipment, your arms which you're going to manufacture, and that is where this fusion is like. But in terms of the relationship, there cannot be a fusion because these are too unlike. The politics is the guy who's wielding the sword, is the politician. The instrument is the military. He can hold the sword close, interact and tell them exactly how clear it is. He can direct the sword the way that he wants to. That is the control that he has. But eventually, it cannot be this thing that they are one. It cannot be because, as I said just before, the politicians have no idea about what this military force can achieve in a particular context.
So I go with this. No, I go with what you're saying. The point, what I'm trying to make is, and the point which was being made is, we'll talk of civil military relations in this context. Leave the fusion part of it out at this point of time. He says, look, his understanding was that should it be civil military relations where the military gets more involved in the politics in the civilian part, or the civilian part or the civilian hierarchy gets more interested in the military and gets more involved in the military. That's the basic posit which is put up.
I got it. So the point is like this: if you look at the two larger models which is often discussed, which is the Soldier and the State by Samuel Huntington and Morris Genovitz about this, I will forget the name of the book. In both these, one of the emphasis is, and this is meant for democracies, one of the emphasis is that it is professionalism of the military or the armed forces which must therefore be central to it being not involved in the politics of that state.
Yeah, I think that's a very critical point which you made, that the military in any democracy has to stay far away from the politics of the state.
Yet, I think we, especially in terms of foreign policy and so on, military leaders have to understand the nature of politics which is there, because it is in the breeding ground of politics the problem is created and where you are being used. So without understanding the politics, you will not be able to understand how do you apply this military instrument the best. It's like even in the counterinsurgency. Let's say even in Kashmir, a local or a battalion commander or a brigade or even a corps commander, to apply a force and to direct force, he has to understand the politics. So he can't be part of that politics, but he has to understand it. And that is, I think, where the connection is. But we are very, very proud that we try our best to maintain a political character. But the danger always is, and probably we are seeing some of it actually rolling out, is when the politicians start interfering in how, in the military itself, and taking control of your professional matters more than what they should, although this is a matter of judgment. And this is always one of the problems, because it's like the Chinese army is answerable to the Chinese Communist Party. They have a military advisor, a military commissar who's always there. We don't belong to that category. In our case, it's completely different. We That's why this notional commander in chief. That doesn't mean you don't. But it is through the cabinet that the all these orders have to come to us, and therefore the point at issue is, we have to understand that we need to play in the soil of politics without getting involved in politics, and that's not so easy, especially in internal conflicts. As you know, we have to be very careful and sensitive, and that is why we have all these. We have sort of maintained ourselves very well so far as the internal thing is concerned, and externally too. I don't think, except for those small. Uh, well, I think the General VK Singh incident probably is whichever way it was, is probably one of the things when the politicians felt, we don't know how far that is true, that there was an attempt at actually using military force against the orders. So, but if you look at the history of our institution, I think we should be proud that we have maintained ourselves in terms of being apolitical, but we can't take it for granted,
Granted, right.
because now what has happened, and which we have seen, is that there is larger interference, not that it has not happened before, in promotions and selection of military leadership. So it is for us institutionally to see what we can do.
So the important 2 points which you made, which is that from a military perspective, we have to understand the soil of politics. Without, and I will not only call it soil of politics internally, I would also call the soil of politics externally and geopolitically. Without getting involved in the the democratic process of that politics, or other being influenced, and you have to rise about it. That's a challenge, I think, but for which we are pretty well trained, and we are proud of what we have done so far. And that's a point you made. The other thing is, the more important thing is, for this military instrument to be sharpened and tough and good, it is the political hierarchy and the political leadership which has to get involved with the military. We've had cases in the past where they've not been so involved, and of late you see them more than involved in in the way the military instrument is being shaped. And the important point you made is that certain things are being forced on the military, which might be not exactly be in the professional interests of the military, right? But they have to get involved. If they get involved, certain non-professional issues will come in, as will the professional enhancement of the military happen. I think that's the bad which you have to take with the good, and that's what is happening. A short comment on this, and I'll take the next question, sir.
Yeah, you see, it is not about this government. All governments
All governments. It's all governments.
will try and see how can they leverage them, the military, whenever, especially in terms of internal domestic politics, in how to make them use it in their favor to show the party and their government in good light. I mean, this is the game which is it's not new. The question is, how does the military leadership at the highest level handle this issue,
Handle
and
this. Yeah.
how it is done? And I think one thing which I want to state here is, see, the politician, it's not about, you cannot possibly refuse any order which is given to you, but any order you don't like, If the highest leader, the chief, walks up, either wants to and tells the defense minister or the prime minister behind closed doors, they always normally listen to you unless there is major reasons for them not to withdraw the order. That's how it works. You can't see
Yes,
this
sir.
space, and
Yeah,
I
in
think
public, we'll leave it at that, sir. Right. So the next question is that am I on track? Yeah, we're on track. We all constantly talk of a whole of the nation approach these days in conflict, oblique, war-like situations. That's the thing which keeps us. What is the role of, I wouldn't say you leave the word fusion out. What is the role of this politico-military relationship in adopting the whole of the nation approach? How is this whole of the nation approach achieved through good civil military relationships?
see, actually, as the surface area of war and warfare has increased, like today we have not only sea, land, and air, we have also got space and cyber. And even within that, the types of warfare which can be carried out is also different. The military is not the only instrument in play. I mean, just look at space, look at the actors in space, or look at cyberspace. The military cannot have an independent existence as much as they can probably have on land, air, and sea, because the actors are too many. Now, this calls for a much larger interaction between these agencies, and how it is to be managed both during no war, no peace and during war is a matter of how organizations are shaped and developed to manage this. Because one of the most difficult things in government is to get everybody to be on the same I mean, you can have them on the same table, but to agree, because every institution, every will just look at their own interests, and this has been the bane of our national security issue, especially because the leaders, most of the time or some of the time, are not able to go up from protecting their own institution to look at a larger perspective of national security. So this coordination thing, and that is why the National Security Council Secretariat was formed, so they are the integrators of all these things and put them onto the same platform. So the military has actually lost a lot of its independence in these two areas, which it had in land,
Earlier.
sea, and this calls, therefore, for a much larger interaction. And therefore, one of the things which has been striving to do is to have integrated organizations. It's not only about Army, Navy, Air Force, but you have people even from, let's say, space and cyber, depending upon what the function of their organization, to have as many people from different places who sit together under the same roof and work out things for themselves. Because that is, I mean, it's always easier said than done. And on this note, one of the main problems of military and civil is about the rank structure of the military and the rank structure of the civil services. And especially it is problematic at the level below the brigadier, colonel, and even lieutenant colonels. What are they equivalent to in within their counterparts? Because a brigadier in our case would have actually 30 plus of service, but the guy who's supposed to be of his equivalent rank in the civil, this thing will be actually just having 10 years of service. So we have not been able to sort this out. And we must at least understand that these things matter when you are part of the same function, part of the same office, and one guy is actually having only 10 years of service, but he's equivalent to a brigadier from the army or a colonel from the army who's got much more service. But how to resolve this has it's not been easy, and it's just you can say band-aid has been put. But if you really want to have integrated organizations, you need to resolve this equivalence issue. And it's not that it cannot be resolved, There will always be way of resolving it, but then it requires agreement between both the parties, and that is what has been difficult to get.
Right. I'll put this in a slightly different frame. I mean, I'm this whole question, the larger question. Our experience is that whenever there's a crisis or when there's an external pressure, the nation rises up to it, and the whole of the nation approach is quite visible. But the problem which we have constantly faced is this whole of the nation approach doesn't happen during normal times. And the requirement is exactly the opposite probably. You need more of the whole of the nation approach in the run up to a conflict than during the conflict. And how do you build this up? That's the $1 million question.
Yeah, actually, so the building of this is actually through having integrated institutions and platforms where this interaction can take place, and they are already there. But the point at issue is, we our problem is also we might have these institutions, but they don't meet, or if they meet, then one party doesn't turn up, or they send junior peoples to that party. They treat it in such a way that it's not an importance which it has. Uh, and this requires, therefore, leadership. Whoever is in charge of that subject, who has got to get, they have to actually drive it. It's not easy, because in our system, one of the major problems is getting different ministries to cooperate with each other, because they are under their own ministers, and depending upon the power the minister wields, there is a whole lot of dynamics which play within that. So it's something which, that is why, precisely why, the National Security Council is also known as the Chief Security Integrator. But National Security Council can't be anywhere. And therefore, one of the things is about cross pollination between all the services. After all, after the Kargil Committee report, what had happened was that one of the recommendations was that there are certain identified organizations like the MOD, the MEA, the MHA, the intelligence services, which should have a common cadre who should actually populate these and move around, because they are national security related issues. Well, the cabinet approved it, and then a committee of secretaries was formed, who, after a couple of years, decided that because of cadre management problems, this system cannot be changed. So that's where we.
So we'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at that. Then that's where our nation is. So this whole of nation approach, we should be prepared for the fact that it's going to come in fits and starts. Sometimes it would be there, and sometimes it won't be there, and depending on the external pressure which we're going to have, we're going to experience it or not. So we'll take another facet of this whole story. Why do civil military relations in India appear constantly frayed? Because it gets to that, if you don't have, and of course, some of the issues which the reason for which it happens, you already said so. Because we have a large government and things don't happen and all that. But do you think there are reasons beyond this? There are reasons to be attended to where we need to look into it?
Yeah. So actually, one of the meta reason is the fact that there is lack of political guidance given by the political leadership to the military as an institution. And this guidance is at the moment practiced by, the Arms Directive. And who makes the Arms Directive? It is made by military guys itself, who then send it to them, and they probably will circulate it, or may not even circulate it, and then it's issued to the military. So in our case, so far, it is the military which provides its own guidance to itself. And this was supposed to be rectified by the national security strategy when the document is supposed to come. But as you know, that has been lost in the wilderness, despite uh, the NSA being tasked for it. And there are also this thing that we don't require as this, even if it's not required, at least we require some political guidance, which the Ministry of Defense must be given from the top. The Ministry of Defense cannot decide for itself, because this has to be, as you said, a holistic approach, a perspective much beyond this thing. Is military is only one part of dealing with threat. So one is this problem which has to be rectified. We cannot continue the way we are continuing if we look at what it is amounting to, because what it is amounting to is then therefore everybody decides what sort of war they want to fight, what sort of equipment they require. So it is you can say an aggregation of all wish lists of all the three services, which is done translated into 5-year capability plan and so on, and you are well aware of all these things. So the one of these this thing has to be resolved. The second thing is that within the MOD itself, let's just take the DRDO for that matter. DRDO's responsibilities and functions are very clear, but there are many projects they indulge in without actually having anything to do before with the services, and then they will tell the services that once they've reached a point that we have made this, now they will ask,
Take it.
do you want it? I mean, this is not the way that we do. We're supposed to work together. And this is another problem about our defense industrial base itself is, first, what do we want? Why do we want it? Who's the one to say it? I mean, without the user actually saying what he wants, how can they imagine what we want? Because some technology is already available there, and this has not been rectified as yet. Although we must at least, in the slew of measures which have been taken recently, like IDEX and so on, they may not be perfect, but I think once we know when that, because everything has to be judged by delivery, we cannot talk about anything without just saying that this is all is happening. But if delivery is going to take place, then I think what it is. But I think the other crucial point, you can't do all this without actually increasing your defense budget. I mean, look at the defense budget itself. I mean, you could eventually it's all about money, right? Especially for acquisition of arms and so on. If you look at the graph of the defense budget, we are at one of the lowest levels since the 1962 war, and I think. So how are we doing all this or saying we are going to do all this when we don't have the money? Because one of the other problem was about the fact that a lot of money was being spent on revenue, especially the pension bill and so on, and therefore about. So we need to take and take this thing of the issue that without the resources, the fiscal resources and the monetary resources, it's not possible to become a modernized force in the time frame that we require it. Because if you see the global geopolitical situation, it looks like it's already there. I mean, there is no that we have already lost a lot of time. So we need to rectify that, and we need to tell the political leadership, because they are actually doing what they have to do. But we need to tell
Yeah,
them that
I, I, I think you made two important points. One is in this changing geopolitical equations where India is getting a larger footprint. The old method of giving up RM's political directive, I think, is outdated, self-written, and each to his own kind of a political directive, where everyone does what it suits him best, what in his opinion suits the nation best, right? Is quite frayed, and that is the thing. So I think you're making a point somewhere that we need a national security strategy or a national security directive or national a set of common principles by which we have to work and the common guidance by which we have to work. And that guidance probably will have to be made at the appropriate level through a consultative process, whichever way you like it. But I think that's what comes out of what you're saying. And secondly, in the absence of what we want to do, and in the knowledge that we have to go somewhere, but in the absence of not knowing what to do, we are allotting a small cake. And that cake, there's a competition for that cake. As a result of that, everyone is competing for that, and there's a lot of fraying. I think that's the two important things which you made the point. Am I right in what I say?
absolutely,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
we'll move to the second one. Yeah, right. So if having said that, so let's take another thing. Right. Uh, Look, civil military relations are between the elected government and the military. I mean, let me expand it a little further. You see, as per the Constitution of India, the government of India and the elected representative of the government of India are mandated to guard the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the nation, or also to advance its interests, national interests. And by the mandate of your commission, you are supposed to help that or assist that political executive in doing it. You are mandated as a army officer or naval officer or armed forces officer. And invariably in most countries, you see that the equation is directly between the political and the military leadership. They are responsible for the defense of the nation. But in our country, we have this strange person called the bureaucrat who comes in as a conduit. So it actually, instead of becoming a politico-military relationship, it becomes a politico-bureaucratic military relationship, right? And there's a bit of a separation between the two. I would like to hear your views on that because I think this is a very fundamental issue in the entire process of our civil-military relationship.
Okay.
All yours, sir.
Right. Firstly, what is the role of the bureaucrat? We need to ask ourselves. The role of the bureaucrat is actually governance, because they are the ones who are the permanent, and no politicians and political organization can function without this bureaucratic support. And they are the ones who knows all the rules, the procedures. They can create it, and they know it best, and they have, let's say, it's like look at the Ministry of Defense. I mean, you look at the pace of change within military officers who deal with them, in terms of number of years which they spend, and you look at the permanence which the bureaucrat has. So his knowledge base and his ability to look at a larger file, and he has all the information is much. So he's a knowledgeable guy, but he's a knowledgeable guy based on paperwork. He has no idea of what this military instrument can do. That is the professional this thing of the military. But without him, the politician cannot possibly function. So he requires the bureaucrat. There is no doubt about it. Now, the question which you are raising is, how is that the Defense Secretary of India is actually responsible for the defense of the country and so on? That's a valid question, especially now since we have a Department of Military Affairs, where there is a secretary, and the CDS being also one of the hats that he wears. I think it's time that we moved that particular responsibility from the department, from the DOD to the DMA. Because right now, even the DOD is also responsible for acquisition, capital acquisitions, and so on. So the DOD also controls, let's say, the Coast Guard. Who should control the Coast Guard? After all, Coast Guard has got, they both can sometimes operate with the military, but mostly in peace, where no war, no peace, it does with the civil. But your basic point, that who is responsible for it. But actually, if you speak to a politician, he says, eventually it is the Ministry of Defense which is responsible. But since this thing has been given to the Defense Secretary, the interpretation of that has been that therefore the DOD, headed by the Defense Secretary, is in charge of the policy, whereas the DMA is the one which is at the next level of strategy. I think this argument no longer holds, and they need to actually shift this responsibility to the DMA. Yes, I think there.
So what you're suggesting is there has to be a greater political and military connect, and that politico-military connect can only come if the military is responsible to prepare the nation the way the elected representatives of the state want it to happen. And the bureaucrat has to be an enabler rather than the policy maker.
You see, it's like this, that I think now that, after all, this particular uh, structural this thing of establishing a Department of Military Affairs, I think is a very commendable move by this government. There is no, in my mind, there is no doubt about it. So is the establishment of the CDS and telling him to come with the theater command. But there is still a lot of powers. Let's take acquisition for that matter. See, it should be obvious to us that we should not encumber the DMA with the final acquisition process, which involves a whole lot of negotiations and the rest of it, which can be done by the. But what are you going to negotiate? Which arms are you going to negotiate? That decision must lie with the Department of Military Affairs. Once that decision is handed over, and of course there's a lot of overlap between these two, then the negotiation for acquisition and so on can be left to this thing, because that involves a whole different set of skill sets which which probably the military will not have. So I think there is a need to actually now start drawing the lines and identify the one which needs to be still given to the military and DMA, and what should be given to the DOD. At the center of all this is the defense sector. So it doesn't mean, therefore, that this defense secretary is going to lose his shine, and the DMA uh, should will take over. And I think this is the turf battle which is going on at present, and we will have to wait and see as to where it will
How
take
it
us.
goes, sir. Okay. So the last point of the day, sir, which I would like to discuss with you, what is the significance of civil-military relationship, not fusion, relationship for a rising India whose international footprint is increasing? Because that's where I started today's topic, and that's why we are discussing this topic. And if your GDP is galloping and you are going to be the third largest economy very shortly, with that your comprehensive national power will go up, and hence we have to take this civil-military relationship to a different level. So I'd like your opinion on all this.
See, actually, as far as you just look at the MEA representation in the MOD, and look at MEA representation in the headquarter IDS. Both there are posts, and I was told that for a long time there is no MEA person in the IDS, and even in the MOD there's been these vacancies and all. But that does not mean that there is no coordination between these two, because as far as, let's say, joint exercises, one of the major things where actually India is displaying its military power is about joint exercises. I think that particular segment of activity is now a part of a well established coordinated setup. We have no problem with actually our own, because at the inter-service level and even with the MEA, because it requires a lot of coordination. So that is not a problem. The larger issue which actually you're saying is, are we displaying a certain weakness of whether we are prepared to fight? Are we showing weakness which is weakening our deterrence capability? I think one of the earlier points that you made is that we can actually, the only thing which needs to be corrected, because as you said, in a crisis we are very good. We are crisis
Yeah, not
management.
good.
Good,
Yeah,
pretty good.
fantastic.
But in preparing is where we are
Prepar-
actually lacking.
well,
So we have to go around shopping and so on. So this has been, I mean, after all, self-reliance is not it's not something which has come about now. We've been trying for it, but let's hope we can make this progress, because one of the things is that our vulnerability is that our dependence on arms and technology from others. Our enemies know it, our friends also know it, and they can exploit us and affect our relationship. So, India wants to be a part of any nature, of any substantial nature. We have to rectify this fundamental issue. And therefore, the trust is good, but trust has always been there. Let's hope we succeed this time better than we have done in the previous efforts.
So the point, yeah, I think before we take on questions, the major point you made, sir, is that if India has to be rising and if you have to be a greater geopolitical power, there is no way but to have better civil military relations at all levels. More importantly, during peacetime to prepare for the conflict or the war. And also, as we are going into a situation where we are transcending from being a balancing power, sorry, from being a swing state to a balancing power, we need to have this formalized in a better manner. Right. With this, I'll take a few questions. A lot of questions are specific to Manipur and things like that. I will not write this thing. Oh, Anand has asked an interesting question, but it has, I mean, it might look a bit naive, but it has got value. So I'll take it. To your mind, would the political military fusion or relationship make India more difficult to conquer, but easy to hold, or easier to conquer, but more difficult to hold?
See, I don't think that in the present state of affairs, although this definition of fusion which is being used by Anand,
No, we
I do
will
not.
not.
We are. I mean, so I mean, I'm just clarifying that point. But the point is that if India does not have an existential threat except probably from nuclear weapons and climate change. So let's be very clear that nobody can come and conquer us and take us over. That cannot be done. I think we are well beyond that stage. All we have to do in terms of civil military is how do we improve military effectiveness? That is the crux of that relationship. And if that relationship is sustained through institutional creation, which we have done. But as I said, we might have the institutions, but we may not put them into use because they are disused. Or even if when the institutions, there is a meeting of one, the other guy doesn't attend. So those are things which we have to get rid of. The point is, it cannot be fused. It has to be separate because this animal is separate, and this animal is the one from where the breeding ground of trouble takes place, and the military instrument has to be used. So they are not of the same. You can say they have got organic composition is different. One is the master, the other is the slave. So let's not think that this guy can have an independent existence. He has to be completely in consonance with what the politics demands. And as long as those orders come from the political leadership who are elected in this country, the military cannot be the judge of whether it can do it or not. The only thing military can do is how is it to be done? How is that task to be carried out? That is the military professional sphere. So I don't think we need to uh, increase this closeness because we think that we have a threat which we as the expression that you're using about holding and so on. We need to improve already those institutions which have been put in place, and as we go forward, this is only going to get deeper because, as I said, especially in cyber and space, there is an expanding number of actors which cannot possibly be. I mean, the sovereignty of the military instrument in those domains itself is questionable.
Right, sir. Rishi Atre says, any comment on books by Steve Wilkinson and Anit Mukherjee? If you read them, you can. Otherwise, we'll pass.
No, no, no. Steve Wilkinson is actually about the martial race. I suppose that's what he's talking about, and how uh, the Indian Army's performance is related to it and how we have dealt with it. But I don't think I would put in particular say, and I just written about it I think 2 weeks ago, that the Indian composition of the Indian troops and its manning has to be all India in nature. And that is why I find it rather anachronistic that even in your regiment, there is, I believe, a light regiment, which is a Gurkha light regiment. I mean,
It's a
I
it's a field regiment, sir.
It's a
It's a
field
field
regiment.
regiment.
It's a
Field
field regiment.
regiment.
I mean, so
It's full.
I think in this day and age, I don't think we should actually we should be doing such things. We should actually change this thing. So Wilkinson belonged to a thought process which existed at that time for the purpose of the British. We are an independent country, and I don't think we need to change.
Right, sir. This is just a comment. अभिषेक मिश्रा says पाकिस्तान म्यांमार के लोगों और सेना को भी ये देखना चाहिए. Thank you. And of course, Kamlesh says, Sir, salute to both legends. Thanks a lot. Okay, again, an interesting kind of a thing, sir. He says, when a prominent politicians tell army pit raha hai China se, when you defeat China, don't you feel the need to correct these politicians and few Indians who buy such narratives?
If the army were to react on all the comments and this thing of politicians, I think we would be in a completely different realm. It is best. The army is not the armed forces need not look for anybody's praise. It believes, and institutionally this is, that let its work speak for itself. Because whatever we might do, there will always be critics, and there will always be people who said you are doing a good job. For us, it is a matter of duty, and which we have shown even to sacrifice our life. It is the ultimate sacrifice that we are ready to pay. So I think to
We
start
leave it
reacting.
at that. And एक और बात है कि at the heat of the battle you can't start reacting to comments. When things are happening, you're focused on something else. We don't get distracted by these people. In fact, you don't hear them at all. Okay. And having gone through this entire process of Kargil as a commanding officer, I never knew what was happening. My own whole focus was there because I was not part of the Kargil battle. We were deployed somewhere else to do slightly something different. We never bothered about what's happening. We just looked at what was this thing, right? Now he says this man. The question is thing because he raises an issue. General Shankar and Menon, why did it take 2 days before Indian commandos were sent to tackle the terrorists and attack Mumbai? Is this because of a civil military impasse? I'll add on to that. You have almost a similar situation which repeated itself during the Pathankot thing when, the Pathankot airbase was also attacked. We did see this gap coming up between the civil military equation and the way things moved. So I think you have to address it in the larger thing rather than look at it only in the of the Bombay 26/11 attacks. Have I lost you?
No. I thought you already had said what you had to say. That
No,
was good
no,
enough.
no,
I
sir. Yes, sir.
Hey, listen, that is the point is, have we learned our lesson from what we did the last time? That is the
Yeah,
issue.
that's the point. That's the issue.
Why that happened? The question is, we must learn our lessons. If you're going to repeat the mistakes we have already made, that means there's something wrong with us.
We
So
are,
the only
you see, most of the time in our situation, you see, 26/11, Mumbai happened long back. 2008, 2009. And today, you after a whole lot of 10 years, you again repeat something, and maybe tomorrow you'll do the same thing all over again. So that is why this topic which we've chosen, it has too many intricacies. And as a growing nation, if you have to respond to these intricate problems, you have to have very stable civil military relations, and we have to take these civil military relations to the next level. Otherwise, we are in trouble. Otherwise, the trouble is this will not be a nation which is counted in the International Committee of Nations as a great power, if that is what you want to be spoken of. Okay, yeah, we'll take this answer, but can the Indian state exert influence over the military's procurement decisions, particularly when it comes to specific equipment choices like favoring indigenous options? Can I answer this, sir? Because I've been
Yeah,
handling
please.
this.
Yeah, yeah.
See, the government doesn't ever tell you to take a particular equipment or not. That is not in our process at all. The government can say go for indigenous things, and then if you want to go for an indigenous thing, right from the start, you go for an indigenous option. And it depends on how you categorize that thing and whether you have indigenous options or not, because in many times you don't have indigenous options. You need to go abroad. Now, our entire process is if you go in, you do your selection based not irrespective of who's going to get the contract or from which source you're going to procure a piece of equipment. You go through the whole thing, then you throw up the choices to the government, and then let the government decide. And the government doesn't decide on whims and fancies. There is a process of cost negotiation, contract negotiation. Now, when all these are put together, it is by elimination or by choice you come to the final guide with whom you're going. It is not by any political decision. And let me assure you, our processes are such that at least it needs two government to handle one case, right? It could be the same party, government of the same party, but invariably the entire procurement process is a minimum a decadal process. That's what I call it, a decadal process. In a decade, at least two governments come into play, and at times even three. So be rest assured that there is no this thing in this. Okay, right. Okay, I'll tackle this, sir. I mean, you could also tackle it, there's no issue. Why is the military not tackling the Manipur riots and civil unrest? The military must tackle external and internal enemies of the state. In order to protect the state, is the civil military impasse at play? Your all yours, sir. I mean, I think it's fairly.
Okay, right. I think, and this is my personal viewpoint, what we are seeing is the absence of the state when there is widespread violence, not only widespread, it is also still spreading because it has got now gone across the Manipur's border, and there are troubles in Mizoram and Nagaland which are being brewed. The state seems to be absent because one of the first things of the state was to impose its will and bring violence under control. Whereas the state government implements had failed, about the looting of the arms and all which had taken place, there has been no other moves made to impose the state this thing, because violence can only be controlled by violence beyond a particular point. You can't start negotiating because these now people have got armed, and they had to use the only force which was probably available, which could be independent, was the DG Assam Rifles and the Indian Army. But to use them, you also required certain powers to be given to them, which has not been given to them. And what I can see is that the state is complicit in inaction. Not only has it allowed the chief minister to continue after all this has taken place, it has remained a silent spectator. And of course, the PM's silence itself speaks for itself. So, in my view, you will have to dismiss the government, the union will have to take over, you'll have to then impose the will of the state. And after all, you are supposed to have control on the monopoly of violence. So you got to bring it under control, whatever it might take, even if it is to do with how do you handle movement. I mean, there's nothing which cannot be done by the state, but there is no political will to do so. And that, I think, is the
Yeah,
tragedy. This is a personal viewpoint.
yeah, no. I completely endorse your viewpoint, sir. And this is what I have already said in my discourses on Manipur. I've done 3 videos on Manipur, right? The fact that this has come to this status is not because of a civil military impasse. It is because of the political, will to solve the problem. And I won't say solve the problem, to stop the violence has not been there. Unless the armed forces are enabled to act, they can't act. Today, the situation in Manipur is that the armed forces are not enabled to act. There are certain steps to be taken. and it can be taken. If those steps are taken, I don't think this entire violence will last beyond a week. That's my personal viewpoint, and this personal viewpoint is based on the fact that I have served in that state. And also I had, having served in almost the entire South Assam, which was under me, and part of Manipur, right, and having known the dynamics of the thing, uh, it is absolutely something completely political, right? And I think the armed forces cannot cross that line. And that's what the maturity of the armed forces is. They're trying to handle this without crossing the line, right? It is the political system which has to rise to the occasion. And I think it's the political system which today is, what shall I say, not rising to the occasion. Um, okay, this is an interesting question. The other day, you had asked that to again ask the question: why don't our retired generals consider joining national politics? Isn't it necessary? It may solve civil-military issue.
Is it
It's
directed
a
at you?
googly, sir, but we'll take it on. Answer.
Well, actually, there is nothing stopping the retired generals from joining politics. But as you see, there are very few generals who have succeeded in the dirt of Indian politics because you have lived in a particular quality of professional and personal life which is completely different from these the stink and the dirt which politics involves. So unless you have a thick skin, you are not able to last in Indian politics. So most of the generals and those who tried also did not. I mean, after all, chiefs have tried, stood for elections and failed, have not succeeded. But I don't think that the generals are particularly qualified to join politics and contribute to it because in India, it is not about individual politicians contributing. It is about party politics, and you have to be part of a party which has to be the collective which contributes. Now, unless you believe that this particular party is better than that party, and therefore you should join this party, and you will be able to join, because when the general joins, he doesn't start at the top; he starts somewhere, in
At the
between.
bottom.
So this idea that generals should join and therefore purify Indian politics. Either we don't understand the nature of Indian politics or we think that the generals have got superlative powers to delve on the subject. But I don't think that is. But those who can
Yeah.
must try because they're
Why
citizens of
not?
the Why not?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. That I leave it at that. So Vijendra says, "Sir, thank you. This is the best discussion on this topic. Literally, common public do not dive in these types of discussion, which is equally important for national security. Thanks a lot." And Maximilian says, excellent decision on DMA. Bureaucracy is good at negotiation and sorting out final aspects. Fair enough. Yeah. Salute General Shankar, salute General Menon with CDS and Theatre Command. The CDS part of Security Committee of Parliament. Maybe the fusion will be better, sir.
No, that cannot be. The Security Committee, the Cabinet Committee on Security only consists of an elected body which has to be, it cannot be, even the NSA is not part of the committee itself. He actually can be there in attendance and the committee can call anybody, but the CCS has got five people: the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, the Defense Minister, the External Affairs and Home Minister. This is
Yeah.
the core Cabinet Committee on Security. CDS cannot possibly be part of that membership. So I think we need to forget that.
We'll leave it at that because yeah, this point we had clarified when General Doa had explained this, right? And now General Menon has reinforced it. The Cabinet Committee of Security is the apex body on security, and there's no one else can dilute it by getting into it. Okay. So some opinion pieces argue that military leadership appears more hawkish on China and more willing to align with US and the civil counterpart. Do you agree with? And if yes, what is the reason? Uh, We can pass this question, sir, actually, because this is to do with geopolitics and it has nothing to do with military-civil equations at this point of time. So we'll give this a pass, right? Maybe someday when I'm discussing USA and China, you can ask this, right? Uh, okay, okay. So, from a legal or constitutional standpoint, does the military have the right to engage within the country by default, unless some special scenarios like emergency or ASPA?
The military cannot be an independent actor, and it has to be requisitioned for being employed within the country. And therefore, even theoretically, even a district magistrate can actually requisition the military. But wherever there is a communal issue involved, the practice has been so far, after experiences, that requires this thing of the Ministry of Defense. I mean, it cannot be done by the district magistrate itself. So the military has no independent agency to decide that they are going to be there, unless, of course, it is a disaster which has taken place, and even before the requisitions, the military will always react, which is always done. So we have got something called aid to civil authority, and there is a complete manual which governs those, and it's governed by the rules. So there is a procedure which is laid down, and these things are all well tied up.
Yeah, yeah. I think we've come to the end of the thing, sir. We've had a very interesting discussion. I mean, I'll ask you one question. How did you find the quality of questions in this
Very
today?
interesting, because the fact that there are so many questions itself speaks for itself, and the idea of trying to propagate what is this notion that why is the civil and the military, why cannot be the same, because they're by nature different. They cannot be the same, and that is why we have a uniform which gives us a completely different, imbues it with a completely different responsibility. Because after all, one of the greatest things the military enjoys in this country is that there is a particular image which generally the citizens of India has of the military, and I think over a period of time we have earned it, and we hope that we will be able to maintain it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair one, sir. And I must thank you for choosing this topic. I must tell everyone, when I asked General Menon which topic we want to speak on, he, without a second thought, he said civil military relations. So I said, fine, because this is a topic which you have not discussed otherwise. And I needed someone very, very mature and wise, because you need wisdom to talk on this. Anyone can talk about civil military relations, but you need to talk wisely. And that's what we got today. We got wisdom from you. So thanks a lot. And
Thank you.
I'd also like to thank everyone who asked these questions. In your own way, you asked actually quite tricky and difficult questions and relevant questions. They might not be the way a strategist would ask, but these such questions coming from a common man, the common Indian, and the common Nagrik is it makes me feel happy, and that's why it makes me feel happy that I started this channel called Gunner Shot, which is quite different. And let me conclude by saying, today I got a thing that why don't you join a particular channel, get people like Major Gaurav Arya or someone else and someone else onto the channel, and make your channel more glitzy and all that. Look, the idea of this channel is not that. This is a very serious channel where we're going to take serious topics and difficult topics and make them simple and discuss it and give it to you people so that you can understand it. And there might be some ideas which can get picked up from here and go up to the top. That's the idea of this top thing. This is not a channel for entertainment by any stretch of imagination. We'll give you the best and the latest. That's what I wanted to convey to all of you. So thank you once again, and thank you to the audience. Good evening and Jai Hind, and thank you. Good evening, sir.
Thank you very much.